What is up guys, Blue Spooky here. If you guys are enjoying the daily uploads, please be sure to remember to like, share, comment, and subscribe if you end up enjoying the video. If you guys have any thoughts about the stories in the video as you're listening, please be sure to leave them in the comments, as reading those is my favorite part of making these videos. We've been doing really good with this lately, so I hope we can get to 1,000 likes or so. That would be a really good milestone for the video. Without further ado, I will let you guys enjoy the next hour or so of scary stories, and I hope you guys have a great day. This happened years ago when I was a kid. I was homeschooled up until the time I went to high school. This happened when I was 10 years old. During this time, I lived with my parents and my sister in a pretty average house. Our neighborhood was also what I would describe as average as well. I always considered it to be very safe, and I would guess that my parents did as well. The typical school day for me was to work through these books that I had. They were basically the same books you would do in public school. Instead of sitting in class listening to a lecture though, I would just do them at home. I would read the chapter, then do the worksheet that was at the end of it. My mom was a teacher and would assign me which problems to do. She would also grade me and explain things to me that I didn't understand. She administered tests to me as well. One day, my dad was at work, and I was doing school. I don't remember why, but my mom had to go someplace with my sister. Might have just been to the grocery store or something like that. Like I said, I don't recall exactly why I didn't go with them. I was just old enough at that age to be able to stay home by myself for a little bit. I remember that my mom left and I was sitting in the living room at this table we had in there. I was doing some schoolwork, working on some type of worksheet. It was probably about 10 minutes after they left. Sometime in the later morning hours, the table I was sitting at was sort of at the end of the living room. I remember I was just kind of looking around when I noticed something strange in one of the windows. It was a window near the far end of the room, and I swore I could see somebody peeking inside. It appeared to be a man, but I couldn't get a good look at him. He was not looking in my direction, not that I was aware of at least. The window he was looking in through was at the front of our house. I was really creeped out by this. I got up and walked over to the window to look outside. When I reached it though, he was already gone. I looked out and couldn't see the man in our front yard or out in the street. I wasn't sure where he had gone so quickly, but I was just glad he was gone at all. After that, I went back to the table and continued to do my schoolwork. I'm not sure exactly how long I was working, about 5 more minutes at most. That was when out of nowhere, I heard the back door to our home opening. I was confused at first. Then I quickly realized what was happening. The man I'd seen in the window must have gone around to the back of the house and entered. I didn't think the back door had been left unlocked, but apparently it had. Now, from where I was in that moment, I was at the edge of the living room and the dining room. Connecting the dining room to the back of the house was a kitchen, where the back door was. The man entering was out of my line of sight, but just barely. As I heard his footsteps entering my home, I got up and ran into the living room. That was farther away and more out of sight of where the man would be. Luckily, the entire living room was carpeted, so I didn't make much noise. I knew I had to get out of there or hide. I quickly ran over to the couch and slipped underneath it. It was a decent-sized sofa, so there was a good amount of space below. Plus, I was small for my age. It was one of my favorite hiding places for hide-and-seek when I was younger. Just what I needed for this moment. After I slipped under the couch, I tried to be as quiet as I could. I heard footsteps drawing closer, and I got really nervous. I was scared the man somehow knew I was hiding underneath this couch. He approached the living room that I was in. That's when I realized I had to call the police somehow. Back then, cell phones were not common at all though. I certainly didn't have one at least. The man walked just inside the living room, and I really freaked out. He seemed to walk through and then head towards the hallway that led to some of the bedrooms. I felt a bit safer as his footsteps got farther away, but I was still terrified. I looked around underneath the couch. The only thing there was an extra blanket and some pillows. I moved myself over toward the back corner underneath, and that's when I had an idea. On the right side of this couch, near where I was a side table, and on that side table was a corded house phone, one of several we had back then. I knew if I could just reach that phone, I could call the police. I didn't want to risk having my hiding place revealed, though. I also didn't want to make any noise. I lifted up the trim that went around the bottom of the couch. The cord for the phone was somewhat long. I went over to the edge. I took a blanket from underneath the couch and moved it against the wall. Then I reached and grabbed the cord and yanked on it. The phone was pulled from its place and fell onto the floor. It hit the area where I'd placed the blanket, preventing it from making much noise. I grabbed the phone and was able to dial 911 on it. I was lucky our model of phone allowed you to dial on the actual phone itself. I hit 911, then covered the phone with a blanket so there wouldn't be any noise. I was able to hear just enough by pressing my ear to it. When the 911 operator asked me what was going on, I whispered that somebody had broken into my home and I was hiding underneath the couch. I gave our address and was told the police were on their way. To stay hidden, they stayed on the line with me, and it made me feel better. Meanwhile, I hadn't heard any other noises inside our home for a while. I knew they had gone toward the bedrooms, but beyond that, I didn't have a clue what was happening. Minutes went by, and I remained hidden where I was. I still heard nothing. It wasn't until a couple of minutes after that I heard a noise coming from down the hallway. I couldn't tell exactly what it was, but it assured me the person was still here and still down the hall. They seemed to be in one of the bedrooms searching for something. I kept on hiding. It felt like forever, waiting for the police to get there. The person stayed where they were for the next few minutes. Then, at last, I heard some noise out front. The police were finally here. I heard movement down the hall, and then a flurry of footsteps. The man started moving back from the hallway to the living room. He wasn't there for long, though. He swiftly moved back out toward the kitchen. It was a huge relief to hear that. He then left the house, but the police caught up with him not long after. They must have seen him fleeing. I came out from underneath the couch. The first thing I remembered was seeing police in the front yard. I went over and opened up the front door. I was told they had located the man in the backyard. An officer came inside and spoke with me, then contacted my mom. She got home a short time later. It was a very crazy experience. After that, I wasn't left home alone for a long time. I didn't really want to be either. Looking back, I can't believe that situation worked out as well as it did. I was really scared, but thankfully I was able to do what I had to do. I feel very lucky it turned out the way it did. This is the story of last spring, when I went on a trip with some friends. I was a senior in college during this time, and spring break came in March. My friend group that was going was the 3 other girls I lived with in a house at school, and one other we'd planned the trip with all the way back at the beginning of the school year. We were going to Miami, Florida, which is a popular destination for spring break. It's a good city and there's a fun beach there. We were planning to have some fun activities. It was also very cold at the university for us, so we were happy to be going to a warmer place in Miami. When spring break came, we all boarded a flight and arrived in Miami on Friday evening. The 5 of us had rented an Airbnb together, which was pretty nice. It was a 3-bedroom house that wasn't that large, but there was plenty of space for us. It was a good location, and we'd saved some money by booking it early. The price wasn't too bad because we'd split the cost 5 ways as well. We were staying for a total of 5 days. The first couple of days there went exactly as expected. We went to the beach a lot, hit some restaurants and bars nearby, as well as some other places here and there. There were a lot of awesome places we could go to pretty close by. Many were within walking distance even. Others we would take Ubers or public transportation. Some of the time we would split up a little bit, but usually all of us would do everything together. On the 3rd night, I believe, we had been out until around 10 or so. We all went back to the Airbnb. We had been out since pretty early in the day, so most of us were pretty tired. I, however, was not. I was really hungry and wanted to go grab some snacks. I asked anyone if they wanted to come with me, but everybody declined. One of my friends did offer to come, but didn't want to get anything, so I said it was fine for them to not tag along. I left the Airbnb by myself and started walking toward the street that had everything on it. It would only take about 10 minutes to get to the convenience store. I just had to go a block or two, then take a left. I started walking along this street. Now, this street had hotels, restaurants, and even stores on it, but right now it wasn't busy. There were a few cars driving by here and there, and maybe 1 or 2 people out walking, but other than that, not much. I was walking along the sidewalk looking for a convenience store I'd seen earlier. I couldn't remember exactly where on the street it was, though. Not long after I started walking on the sidewalk, a car came driving up. I heard it approaching from behind me. It seemed to slow down right as it was passing. Then it pulled over 10 feet in front of me on the side of the road. I thought maybe it was an Uber, dropping someone off or something. The car was a black Cadillac sedan. I remember after coming to the side of the road, the passenger side window rolled down, the window that was closest to me. All the other windows were heavily tinted, so it was impossible to see inside. Right when I was almost even with the passenger side window that had been rolled down, I heard a voice calling out to me from inside. A man asked me if I needed a ride. I didn't and looked over and said no thank you. The man driving was wearing these giant sunglasses. He then told me to hop in. I said no thanks once more and kept watching. I watched the car pull away from the spot. I found the situation sort of weird, to be honest. What made that guy think I was going to get into his car with him? I had no clue who he even was. The car drove away down the street. After that, I kept on walking. Less than 5 minutes later, I was still walking on the same sidewalk when I heard a car approaching from behind again. I didn't really pay it any attention until I heard it slowing down. When it passed by me, I saw it was the same Cadillac from earlier. This got me a little bit worried. Once more, it pulled over in front of me. When it did, I moved off to the right a little bit to be farther away from this guy. As the car stopped this time, though, the back door opened. I saw a man step out. The man immediately started moving toward me. Nobody said anything. I started to walk away from him. I looked around. Nobody else was in the immediate area. I started running and found the closest building that was open. It appeared to be some sort of restaurant. I ran for the door and slipped inside. After making it in, I looked back out the window. The guy did not follow me through the door, but I could see him walk past several times on the sidewalk, then turn around and start walking back to the car. I just stayed inside the small lobby of this restaurant and watched the guy walk around the sidewalk for a whole minute. Once he finally returned, the car drove away once again. I finally left and walked really swiftly to the convenience store, which luckily wasn't actually that far away. I stayed in there for a long time. just in case the car decided to come back around again. Once I was sure I hadn't seen them in a while, I ran back as fast as I could. Luckily, I didn't see the man again. After that, the rest of the trip was pretty fine, but I was always more careful observing my surroundings after that experience. This happened back when I was in high school. I remember that at my school, we would have a spring break that lasted an entire week. It was sometime in March, I believe. It became a tradition for my family to go on a vacation during that time. We lived up north and usually would travel somewhere warm, down south or something. On this year in particular, I was a sophomore. My brother was a senior in high school at the time. We took a family vacation out to the beach and flew there at the start of the weekend. The trip was going to be about a week long. We were staying in a hotel that was very close to the beach. You could walk there quite easily. After we flew down there, we were able to go to the hotel pool that night. It was a bit later in the day, so we didn't want to do too much. The next day, though, we went down to the beach for the first time. I remember that I went into the water at first, but then I went back to our chairs. We had a few chairs with our stuff at them, and the beach was pretty busy. My parents and brother were all still in the water, but I was a ways away now. I started to sunbathe and relax, while everyone else played in the water. I would say about 15 minutes into this, some random guy approached me. I remember that out of nowhere, I felt a sudden tap at my shoulder. I jumped up really fast because obviously that startled me. When I looked to see, I saw a guy standing there. He was about 40 years older than me, had messy hair and a big sloppy beard. From the start, he was already acting creepy. As if it wasn't bad enough to randomly tap a person on the shoulder you didn't know. He said hi to me and asked me what I was doing. I didn't really know what to say. I mean, we're on the beach, what do you think I was doing? I just said I wasn't doing anything. I was just sitting there. I asked him why he'd come up to me. He said something like he'd seen me from a ways away and thought I looked so good he just had to come over. I told the guy I was still in high school and told him to go away. He said okay and shuffled a little ways back. I returned to what I was doing and laid down and closed my eyes. I just had this gut feeling he was going to continue watching me though. After about a minute, I discreetly sat up a bit and tried to look around. When I did, I saw the guy still there, standing 50 feet away and just staring at me. I decided to go back in the water after that. I went into the ocean and came up to my parents and brother. They were all playing with one of those inflatable beach balls, so I joined in and told them there was a weird guy who tried to come up to me. My dad went back to the shore with me to our stuff. I looked around, but the guy was gone. I looked all around the beach area, but I couldn't find a trace of him anywhere. He could be hiding, but I had no way to know for sure. After that, I stuck with my parents for the rest of the time at the beach that day. For the rest of the day, my family and I did some other fun stuff. We went to some local attractions, restaurants, and whatnot. We got back to the hotel that night, and were hanging out just before bed. I remember getting really thirsty, so I said I was going to go down to the lobby to get something to drink. I left our hotel room and took the elevator down. There was a small area with food and beverages where you could buy something. When I got to the lobby, things were really quiet. It was a bit later at night. It was also a somewhat large area, which made it even more eerie. I went over to the drink section and grabbed a bottle of water. It was at that point that I looked back to where I had come from and saw that very same guy from the beach earlier. It really took me by surprise. Instantly, I was nervous. He was just staring at me just like before. I went up to the counter and told the front desk worker my room number. I tried to ignore the guy as I did. After I started walking back out of the lobby, though, I saw him get up and start following after me. He even tried to call out to me. I didn't say hi back to him. I just ran for the elevator doors. The guy didn't appear to run after me, but I didn't want to wait for the elevator doors. I remember running up the stairs instead. I don't know why he was even in the lobby. If he was staying at the same hotel or what. When I got back upstairs, I told my parents I'd seen that creepy guy again. The next day was perfectly fine, though. I didn't see him at all, during the day or the night. Unfortunately, the day after that I did. My brother and I wanted to do some more swimming, but it was nighttime. We had been gone for most of the day. The hotel pool was nice because it remained open really late into the night. It was also outside. There was a bar area near it, and overall it was just a really good ambiance. We went down there, and I don't remember exactly what time it was. My brother jumped in and started swimming. I was going to get in too, but it was no longer than 5 minutes before I saw that same man enter the pool area. I was so creeped out by running into him again that I just wanted to leave right away. I started walking out of there. I remember noticing him staring at me once again. When I left the pool area, I was just trying to go back to the hotel room, but the man started following after me. I went down the hallway and could hear him walking right behind me. I got toward the elevators and pushed the button, but the man came up like he was going to wait for it too. At that point, I quickly turned and ran for the stairs. This time, I heard the guy clearly following me up the stairs as well. I entered the stairwell and heard the guy enter behind me. He was about 15 feet behind or so. I ran up to the floor we were on and entered the hallway with the guy still on my tail. I had a hotel key, luckily, and started sprinting for the door. At this point, the man gave up the ghost and started running after me. I made it to the door and was struggling to get the key in. I was fumbling all around with it as I could hear the man running closer and closer. Finally, I got the door open. I ran inside and slammed the door behind me. The man actually tried to get in, even though my parents were in the room with me. My parents were just watching a movie on the TV. They asked me what was going on, and I told them the creepy guy had chased after me. They got up, and my dad left the hotel room. I remember the guy was gone by then. After that, we went down to the front desk and reported that man. After that night, I didn't see him for the rest of the trip. I was always looking out for him, though. I don't know exactly who he was, but he was one of the biggest creeps I've ever seen. I was homeschooled from a young age. I have 2 siblings, and I remembered that when I was pretty young, we were in a homeschool group. I don't remember a whole lot about it, but I was 7 years old when this story takes place. During that time, we would go to this community center, probably once a week during the school year. A bunch of other homeschooled people were there as well. It was kind of like actual school. We would go into rooms with other kids our age and do activities and stuff in there. There would be teachers for us in the rooms as well, which I'm pretty sure were just parents that volunteered. I don't remember a whole lot of details about it, but I think we did it for about 2 or 3 years. One experience, though, I really remember well, because of what happened during it. We were at the community center, which was located in a quieter part of town. It wasn't that far away at all from a busier area with stores and stuff, though, probably less than a mile away. Behind the building we were in, there was a little playground and a small grassy field as well. Then there was some sort of road to the west of it. I remember at one point either the lessons had finished up or they'd let us have some sort of recess. I went outside near the small playground. It was just me and I believe one other child, maybe 2. I don't even remember who the kid was because it was so long ago. We were hanging out together playing on some of the playground equipment. There were a couple swings and a slide, not too much fancy. I went on one of the swings at one point. We had been outside for maybe 10 minutes or so when this car started to drive down the street that went by the playground area. What I remember is that the road was usually very quiet, so when a vehicle drove by, it was very noticeable. The car pulled over on the side of the road, not far away from us. After the car stopped, we all just kinda stared at it. I remember the door opened and a woman stepped out. I didn't know who she was and I had never seen her there before. She took a couple steps into the grassy area and then waved at us. I waved back to her and was sort of confused. She started waving us over. Another kid sort of started walking closer to her, but we were both hesitant. I thought that maybe she worked at the community center or something. As we got closer, I remember hearing her call out to me to follow her into her car. That's when I knew something was wrong. I knew better than to get into a car with a stranger. I just stood there. She asked me again to get in the back. She wasn't yelling at me or demanding it, just politely asking. I started moving away and grabbed the other kid as well. Me and the other kid both ran and went back inside. I remember when we got in, I found my mom and told her about what was going on. We went back out, but by then the woman was already gone. I don't really remember much else, but I do know that after that day, we weren't allowed to go outside anymore. Looking back, the story is really creepy. I didn't know at the time how dangerous of a situation I had escaped from that day. I'm from the East Coast, but I went to college at Washington State. I was about as far away as you could be. By my junior year, I looked for any excuse to go home and visit my family. I got my wish when I found out that my aunt and uncle were having a massive family reunion at their farmhouse. I have a really big family, and we're all super close. My grandparents had 10 children, and I'm close to every one of my aunts, uncles, and cousins, except for one uncle. All 10 of my grandparents' children got married, except for my Uncle Ron, who spent a considerable amount of time in and out of jail. Uncle Ron hadn't been seen for a long time by anybody in the family. My grandma had tried to keep in touch with him, but due to his reckless lifestyle, she lost touch altogether, not by choice, but because Ron was just sort of an outright jerk. You see, it's sort of a sore subject whenever the family gets together. We don't mention him at all. I flew home for the party and I was thrilled to see that everybody had made the reunion. My aunt and uncle who owned the farmhouse were significantly older than all my aunts and uncles. Other than their children, I was the oldest of all the cousins. Since there were plenty of younger kids there, I loved playing games with them. I suggested we all play a big game of hide-and-seek together. All the cousins and children loved the idea, so we broke up into little teams. My aunt and uncle's property was massive, and there were tons of places to hide. My aunt said that anywhere on the property was fair game. Just don't go anywhere near the main road. The main road wasn't busy exactly. It's just that since it was in the middle of nowhere and there weren't usually any vehicles, the vehicles that would drive by were usually going 80 miles per hour. When it was my turn to hide, I went into the barn. I was looking around for a cool place to conceal myself. When I got inside, I remembered there was a small loft that you needed a ladder to get into. It wasn't super high up, and the ladder was really thick and sturdy, so I wasn't worried about anyone getting hurt or anything. As I was approaching the ladder, though, I noticed something quite strange on the ground near the base of it. There was a bunch of cigarette butts. I knew my aunt and uncle didn't smoke, especially not now. My uncle had all sorts of lung issues already. I just kind of chalked it up to a weird occurrence. Maybe they had workers there or something at some point, and they happened to smoke. Maybe the cousins did it. I didn't know. I just knew it was really inconsiderate. I've worked on crews before, though, where the smokers would just kind of throw their butts wherever they were when they were done. This wasn't really a red flag to me. I climbed the ladder, and when I got to the loft, things were even stranger. There was trash among all the boxes of storage, like literally trash. Empty cans, bags of chips, that sort of thing. I thought this was really weird. I knew that my aunt and uncle were in no condition to climb this ladder. I continued to investigate the loft. Throughout the dusty floorboards, there were various footprints. I stopped for a second and just listened. I thought I could hear the sound of someone else breathing. Given my anxiety about the situation, though, I told myself I must just be hearing things. I started making my way to the back of the loft, and then I froze. Sitting right there, staring back at me, was a dirty-looking man. My first thought was a homeless man had found his way into the barn and was squatting in the loft. Before I could do anything, the man rushed at me, knocking me over. I heard him jump down to the ground and run out of the barn. Before he hit me, I noticed it wasn't just some random homeless dude. It was my Uncle Ron. I almost didn't even recognize him. I knew his eyes, though. When he ran me over, I was clearly able to get a good look at his face. Instead of creating a scene, I calmly went back down and told my aunt and uncle what just happened. They were outraged, but also very terrified. They were the ones who told Uncle Ron off all those years ago, and he had threatened to kill them many times. The thought that he was squatting in the loft made my aunt turn as white as a ghost. It didn't take long for the entire party to hear what was going on with this game of hide and seek. It ended soon after. I continued throwing the ball around with the kids, though, trying to distract them from what was going on. The police eventually showed up, and we told them everything. We had no idea where to find Uncle Ron now, but that didn't matter. They found him an hour later, walking down the side of the road. Before an officer even approached him, he started to run. He didn't get very far before they apprehended him. They found a large kitchen knife from my aunt and uncle's house on his person. I realize this story may not be as scary for some of you, but put yourself in my shoes, or even my aunt and uncle's shoes. Imagine going up into a loft and being confronted by a strange man staring back at you. Take that one step further. Imagine you're my aunt and uncle, and some person who threatened to kill you was living in your barn. At some point, he was even in the house as well, because he had stolen a knife from their kitchen. Why else would he have needed that knife, other than to use it on my aunt and uncle? He denies that, of course, but I remember the look in his eyes as he rushed me, and those eyes gave me the impression that he intended to do something downright evil. There are Dunkin' Donut shops everywhere here out east. They seem to be at just about every single street corner. Personally, I've always liked their coffee, and I go there all the time. Something happened the last time I went there, though, that has me second-guessing all of that. It was the morning, and I was on my way to work. I don't get coffee every day on my way to work, but here and there. When I do, most of the time I go to this one Dunkin' Donuts store that's right on the way to my workplace. I remembered that I pulled into the parking lot and parked. When I went inside, it was decently busy. A lot of other people were in there, so I got in line. I ordered, and within probably a minute or two after getting my coffee, I left the store. I walked back out to the parking lot. Now, I had been inside for less than 5 minutes altogether. When I got back towards my car, I saw there was a random man standing right next to it. This was weird because I wasn't even parked right next to the building. In fact, I was sort of far away. I walked closer, wondering who this guy was and what he was doing. I didn't get a great look at him. He wasn't exactly facing me. He appeared to be about average height, though, and was wearing a black jacket. He was also standing on the passenger side of my car. When I got closer, it looked like he was talking to someone on the phone. There were no cars parked anywhere near mine, so this was a really weird sight. I finally made it to my vehicle and hit the unlock button. My plan was to just ignore this guy altogether, then drive away. I got inside my car and sat down. I started the engine, but as soon as I did, the passenger side door opened up. I saw the man get in and sit down right next to me in my own vehicle. I was shocked at what was happening. After the guy sat down, I looked over at him. I asked him what the hell he was doing. He was not looking at me, but instead looking out the window. He said nothing. After a few seconds, I said to him, "Buddy, I think you're in the wrong car." He still said nothing. I told him to get out or else. The guy just still kept ignoring me. I couldn't believe this. I said to the guy that if he didn't leave, I was going to call the police. At first, he didn't do anything still, but several seconds after that, he suddenly turned. It was very fast. He reached for my keys, which were in the ignition. I was a little bit slow to react, but I tried to stop him. I grabbed his arm, and he grabbed my face with his other hand. We briefly struggled, but he was able to pull the keys away from me. Following this, the man actually took a swing at me, using my own keys as a weapon. With nothing to defend myself now, I reached for the driver's door. I got out and ran away from the car. I got on my phone to call the police and ran back inside the Dunkin' store. I then let the police know what was going on. As this was happening, I saw my car leave the parking lot with the man. The man was behind the wheel, and he'd clearly stolen my car. The police got there 10 minutes later, and I filled out a report. I also had to call my work and let them know of the situation. Luckily, they understood and allowed me to take the day off. This really could have been a huge headache for me. The man who stole my vehicle was caught later that very same day. Apparently, he was driving very recklessly, speeding and swerving through different lanes. The police even briefly chased him. He eventually pulled over, only to ditch the car and flee into the woods on foot. I was just happy my car didn't have any damage. I got it back, but I've not gone to that store ever since. You know, I always liked birthday parties as a kid, especially the early teenage years. We would play video games, have basketball tournaments outside, just hang out and be idiot boys. As I got older, they lost a little bit of that shine. My friends became less obsessed with sports and video games, and more obsessed with girls. I never had that crazy teenage boy desire to talk to every single girl I laid eyes on, though. I was the sort of person that could only ever fall for one girl, and I only wanted to date her for as long as I had those feelings. I was way too shy to ever initiate any sort of move, though. I remember I was in 11th grade. We went to my friend Mark's house for a sleepover birthday party. I was excited, nervous, and incredibly anxious. The girl I liked was going to be there. I just knew my friends were going to try and start something between us. We all loved Mark's house growing up. It was secluded, and the kicker to all of this was that the house butted up against the back of a cemetery. When we were younger, we would all tell ghost stories and try to jump scare each other. The older we got, we would mostly dare each other to jump the fence and stay in the graveyard for a certain amount of time. I didn't believe in ghosts or anything like that, so I was always the one who went into the graveyard. I could never be brave enough around the girls I liked, so I felt I needed to show my fearlessness in other ways. I became the kid who would do any dare. I don't know if kids still do this today, but when we were that age, we played a lot of truth or dare. That was the game to play around the girls because you never knew what you might get dared into doing. Because all the girls were there, though, I was terrified my friends would dare me to do something to Lily. I didn't want to do that, especially not in front of all my friends. The peer pressure of high school kicked in, though, and I didn't want to be labeled as a coward, so I said dare. I tried to look cool, collected, and brave. As I feared, my friend Mark dared me to take Lily into the graveyard for 10 minutes, and we weren't allowed to come out until the 10-minute timer was up. I realized 10 minutes doesn't sound like a long time, but in my teenage boy brain, being alone with Lily for 10 minutes may have well been a death sentence by embarrassment. Lily seemed pretty excited for her part. She yelled out, "Heck yeah, I'm down. Let's do it, come on." She actually extended her hand to help me out of my chair. I could see out of the corner of my eye my friends all jostling each other with excitement. They knew what they were doing. My heart was thumping out of my chest at this point. If I could accurately depict the nerves and fear I felt in that moment, it might be the scariest story you've ever read. But unfortunately, I have no idea how to accurately relay that information to anyone else. If you have crippling anxiety, I'm sure you know what I'm talking about. Anyway, we made our way over the fence and into the cemetery. Even though I was a bit nervous, I started to feel calm. Lily was walking closely to me, making some comments about forgetting the 10-minute timer, and maybe we should stay here for a while, just hang out together. It was objectively creepy being in the cemetery, but not really that scary. I had been in that graveyard a million times. I wasn't worried about anything. We walked over to this huge tree, and she pulled me down. We sat down and started making some harmless small talk. I was about to make a move when we heard the sound of some tree twigs snapping, and both of our ears perked up. It was a hard snapping sound, the kind that doesn't come from nature just being nature. My first thought was that someone else was there. I looked at Lily and she just seemed to be annoyed. She told me she assumed somebody from the party was there spying on us or trying to scare us. That made all the sense in the world to me. I stood up and started to scan the surroundings. And that's when I saw what looked like two people's heads hiding behind a gravestone. I started approaching them, ready to give my friends a real piece of my mind. As I got closer, I got a good look at these two hiding people, and in that instant, I realized these were not my friends. These were two people somewhere in their mid-30s, a disheveled-looking man and woman who looked like they hadn't slept in weeks on end. I screamed some obscenity. Lily and I ran back to Mark's house. We got inside and locked the door. We were both freaking out. Everyone at the party was more confused than concerned, though. Mark and my friends laughed and assumed we were making it up to get out of that alone time. Thankfully, Lily had seen them too and corroborated my story. After some back and forth, one of my friends said it was probably another couple trying to have some alone time as well. That was the story everyone accepted, but I'd seen the look in their eyes from up that close, and something didn't feel right about those two. Well, the night continued, and the girls eventually left for the night. We were all crashing in Mark's living room. There were about 7 of us guys. I couldn't sleep at all. Lily was on my mind, as well as those 2 freaks in the cemetery. My mind was racing. A little after 3 o'clock in the morning, I thought I could hear a shuffling sound outside the house. I woke up my friend Nick and told him I was hearing something. He heard the same sound, but was trying to convince me it was the wind, or maybe even a deer. For some reason, I felt compelled to pull back the curtain in front of the sliding glass door. When I pulled it back, right on the other side of the glass were the 2 people from earlier. In that moment, with the light coming through, I could immediately tell it was the same couple I had seen. The man had his hand on the door, trying to pry it open, and the woman was standing behind him. Both of them had these dead, unnerving eyes. It was a very deer-in-the-headlights type of moment where we all just stared at each other, then began to panic. My friend Nick and I screamed at the top of our lungs. All the rest of our friends woke up, and those two creeps ran back into the night. Thankfully, all my friends saw the two people running away, and now they believed me. They believed those two creeps I saw earlier had ill intentions, and they definitely meant some sort of harm. Mark woke up his parents, who tried their best to understand our story. At first, they were reluctant to call the police. They assumed we were pulling a prank on them or something. They eventually did call, but as far as I know, nothing ever happened. Mark's family installed a security camera by the sliding glass door after that. Mark said he never saw that couple again. I don't think we ever went to Mark's very much after that night, though. Can you really blame us? That was one of my worst memories that ever took place on a birthday, and I'll never forget the look in that couple's eyes. Even 10 years later, I still remember it like it was yesterday. This happened to me back when I was a kid. I remember that one time I had to go to my older sister's concert. She played some sort of instrument. I don't even remember what it was. I was about 7 years old, and I thought that going to her concerts was so boring. I would have to go to several of them many times a year. One of them I went to with my parents and grandparents as well. I sat there for what felt like hours, listening to various music. The concert was taking place at a local high school. It was not the high school I ended up attending. That one was a few cities away. I remember that after the concert was over, everybody wanted to go into the main area outside the auditorium. I believe it was the cafeteria of said high school. There were only a few tables set up, though, and tons of people were standing around, talking to all the kids who'd performed. Their families and friends all gathered around. After we located my sister, we were talking to her, and some of her friends as well. In this time, I happened to spot one of my friends from school. He had an older sister who was in the concert as well. When I saw him, I walked over to say hi. Then we started walking around the school a little bit, just talking to one another. This only lasted about 5 minutes. Then his parents called him over to leave. At that point, I was toward the front of the school, still in the same large room. I started to walk back over to where my parents and sister had been, but when I got there, I could no longer find them. I figured they must have moved somewhere else. I started to kind of walk around and look for them. The place was extremely crowded. When I was on the side of the room and still walking, this guy approached me out of nowhere. He asked me if I was looking for my parents. The way he was speaking made me think he was some sort of school official or something. He clearly knew who I was, but I had no clue as to who he could be. I told him yes, and he said to follow him, and he'd take me right to them. I began to walk after the man. I know that we went to the end of the room towards the front, and then he took a right. At that point, we started walking down this very long hallway. The hallway was eerily quiet, and nobody else was in there at all. I remember wondering why my parents would even go down this way. My thoughts then changed from wondering why my parents were there to wondering if my parents were there at all. I was starting to get suspicious of this man. My parents had told me many times not to go anywhere with strangers. Once we were toward the end of this long hallway, I saw that at the end was an exit. These exit doors appeared to lead out to the parking lot. I slowed down, then stopped altogether. I had a really bad feeling about this now. When I stopped, the man told me to hurry up. I still wasn't moving, though. At that point, he stepped back and grabbed my hand. He started to pull me to the exit doors. I was resisting and struggling, but I was small for my age, and I didn't have much strength compared to him. The more he tugged on my arm, the more I tried to get away. We were moving in the wrong direction, toward those doors. The hallway that we were in was lined with lockers. I remember I was right next to them as he was tugging on my arm, so I started kicking them as hard as I could. It was making a ton of racket. The man started screaming at me to stop. I didn't. He then grabbed my other arm and picked me up into the air. I was resisting and kept on kicking those lockers. It was making so much noise. All of a sudden, someone else entered the hallway, probably someone who had heard the noise from outside. They yelled and asked what the man was doing. That's when the man dropped me. He bolted and went out the exit door. I went running back toward the person at the end of the hallway. It was a woman I did not know. I went up to her and told her what happened. She helped me find my parents and got on the phone and called the police as well. An officer came out to the school and talked to me. They looked around for the guy, but of course he was long gone. I don't know if he was ever found either. I'm just grateful for that woman, and I'm glad I didn't get kidnapped that night. A few years back, I went to a concert with my best friend Paige. Paige and I were going to see one of our favorite bands perform live. We had planned to go almost a month in advance. The concert was at a location in the city, and quite a few other people were going as well. I remember that because it was downtown parking, it was a little bit hard to come by a space. We found a really cheap lot, but the problem was it was kind of far away from the venue. Parking close by was either obviously not available or super expensive. We didn't mind walking at all though, and we even got there pretty early. After we parked, I remember we were going to go on the sidewalk. This area was pretty quiet, and there were not many other people around. There were these two guys sort of walking nearby us. We hadn't made it more than 10 feet when they approached us and asked if we wanted them to take us closer. They said they could give us a ride there. We said no. We really weren't interested. I remember the guys kept asking if we were sure and said they would even do it for free. We still said no. At this point, it was really sketchy. Eventually, they stopped talking to us and we continued on our way. It took about 20 minutes to walk to the concert, and when we got close, things were much busier. We then went inside without further incident. We were at the concert for several hours. It was really a good experience. When the concert was done, it was now much later at night, probably 11 p.m. or so. We started walking back the same way we had got there from. At first, the sidewalks were absolutely packed, but they got quieter and quieter as we went on. By the time we got within a couple blocks of our car, there was nobody around at all. The area was also much darker, with less street lamps lighting the way. Pretty soon, the parking lot with Paige's car was in sight. It was a lot that was outside and fenced in, but not that secure. You could easily walk right around the fence. There were only about 10 cars in this parking lot right now. Right as we made it and were entering the lot, the same two guys from earlier appeared out of nowhere. They approached us and asked if we needed a ride. We said no. We'd driven here. We even pointed to the car we'd taken. I remember the guys were still trying to get us to go to their car with them. We started walking away, and of course they followed us. I told them to leave us alone, but they didn't. That's when Paige threatened to call the police. At this point, they finally backed off and acted like they had done nothing wrong. They were surprised that Paige would even suggest such a thing. We got into her car and started to drive away. Right as we left the parking lot, we saw bright headlights of a car following behind us. Of course, it was those two guys. When we left, they followed us out and followed us out of the city entirely as well. They kept flashing their brights on and off. It was really annoying and unsettling. At first, Paige took a couple random turns to try and lose them. Then she just started driving back. We weren't really sure what to do about this. After following us for 15 minutes, they finally turned and left us alone. I'm not sure exactly what those guys were up to. I'm just glad they stopped following us home, though. I suppose it's possible that I've been a little overprotective of my daughter. Over the last year or so, I've been trying to cut the cord, so to speak, and allow her to have a little more independence. Almost a year ago, I allowed her to have a sleepover for her birthday party. She was turning 12, and I knew most of her friends. They were all good kids, all but one. Her friend, who I'm going to call Katie for the purposes of this story, was just that typical bad news kid. She came from a pretty rough family, and not to be offensive, but it showed. My daughter was always friends with her, but the older they got, the more I saw Katie going down a darker path. A few weeks before the party, she'd gotten suspended for attacking a teacher. The only reason she didn't get expelled was because my daughter wrote a letter to the principal, basically begging them to give her another chance. And they did. I was on the fence about letting Katie come over, but my daughter begged me. I gave in. What harm could a 12-year-old girl possibly cause in just one night? The night came, and it was just me alone, responsible for all the girls who came over. My husband works overnight, so he wasn't going to be home until 8 o'clock in the morning. I was a little bit nervous about having all the kids in the house, but I trusted my daughter to be responsible and keep everyone under control. For the most part, she did. Even Katie was well behaved and respectful. She even thanked me twice for allowing her to come over. As I was getting ready for bed, I checked in with the girls and told them to behave themselves. As I was walking away, Katie mumbled one last time with a sort of mischievous tone in her voice. "Thanks again for letting me come over." When I turned back and smiled, she looked at me in a strange way. I got the sense that she was ironically thanking me. Now I was just hoping my daughter didn't tell her I didn't want her there. I was sure I was just overthinking this, though. At some point in the middle of the night, I heard a loud bang coming from down the hall. It was like the sound of a pan falling off the shelf or something. I froze for a minute, thinking about the horrible idea of an intruder. I decided to investigate the noise. When I got into the hallway, I could hear muffled sounds of whispers. One of them was very aggressive and angry sounding. I couldn't make out the words. The other whispers were clearly the sounds of someone whimpering. I could hear things like, "Please no, you don't have to do this." I didn't have any idea what to think at this point. I turned the light on in the hallway, and the whispers stopped immediately. I heard the light footsteps of jogging, heading back in the direction of the living room. I still didn't know if those whispers were from the girls or from somebody else entirely. I made my way down the hall into the kitchen. I still hadn't said anything. The light was on and there was a pan lying on the counter. It looked like it must have fallen out of the strainer when it was drying. I was moving the pan back when I noticed one of the steak knives had been removed from the knife block. I'm very meticulous about my kitchen, so the fact a knife was missing gave me immediate pause. I went to the living room and was relieved when I saw the girls sleeping. I was wired after this, trying to figure out what on earth the two girls in the kitchen had been talking about. More importantly, why was there a knife missing? I decided to stay in the kitchen and read until the sun came up, which was only a few hours away. At that point, I just felt I needed to stay awake just in case something bad happened. Not long after I made a cup of coffee and started reading, Katie came to the doorway and asked what I was doing still awake. I told her I couldn't sleep, and I was going to read in the kitchen. She looked annoyed and confused. Eventually, she turned back around and went to sleep. I assumed she'd gotten up to use the restroom. It didn't occur to me until later, though, that when she confronted me in the kitchen, she never went to the bathroom at all. She literally got up just to confront me. In hindsight, that's more than a little weird. The morning came, and all the girls were just being silly in the living room. I made them some pancakes, and the strange uneasiness eventually faded away. One by one, the girls were getting picked up. I just so happened to be standing near the living room when Katie was packing her bag. I noticed her slipping the kitchen knife into her bag. I'm a coward, so I didn't say anything. Say what you will, but in that moment, I felt a genuine fear something was not right with Katie. I said goodbye to her, and she turned and left without saying anything. Thankfully, nothing more happened regarding this story. At least, nothing that I know of anyway. I have no idea what Katie wanted to do that night. I have no idea who the other girl who was crying that night was either. I still have nightmares sometimes, thinking about what might have happened if I didn't wake up and potentially stop Katie from doing something really heinous. Was I the target? I can't be sure. I'm sure I'm just overthinking this. My husband thinks it's a stretch a 12-year-old could be such a monster and is frustrated at me for letting her leave with our kitchenware. I don't know, though. My gut is telling me another story completely. What do you guys think? What is up, guys? Blue Spooky here. Thank you guys so much for watching, especially if you made it this far to the end of the video. If you liked the video, please be sure to like, share, comment, and subscribe if you feel so inclined. If you have any feedback for me as well, be sure to leave that in comments below the video. If you guys have a story you'd like to send in, or if you'd like to contact me for any reasons, there will be links to my social media in the description below the video, including my Facebook, Gmail, and Twitter accounts. Go ahead and send me a message on any of those, and I'll try to get to you as soon as possible. If you do decide to send in a story, please be sure to include in the tagline what the name of the story is if it has one, what type of story it is if it has one, and how you'd like to be credited in the description below the video. Please make sure to include as much detail as you feel comfortable with, and try to use as much proper grammar as possible to make sure you have the highest chance of appearing in a future video. Overall, I think that's pretty much it for now, guys, so thank you so much for watching, and I hope you guys have a great day.